Being and Caring, A Psychology for Living by Victor Daniels and Laurence J. Horowitz, as read by the Happy President. Part 5, Guiding Our Behavior, Chapter 21, Habits and Changes. The adults who cared for us during childhood conditioned us to act in certain ways and not in others, though it's unlikely that they thought of it as conditioning. Many of these habits contribute to our convenience and our safety, our survival and our growth. When my learned automatic responses take care of routine matters, I can be alert to other things. But efficient habits in routine matters can lead me to ignore my responsibility for making choices in important ones. I may inadvertently let my habits govern contacts with people about whom I care deeply, or govern my actions in situations where I need to be creative and original. In school, some teachers helped us develop a sense of competence and love of learning, and others taught us fear and failure. While some helped us find our direction and make our own discoveries, others taught us to line up in mind and body and not ask provocative questions. To the degree that I've been conditioned in ways that block my natural processes, I act like a robot, reacting to programmed instructions in my memory banks. To become a robot has one real reward. It's easier to be a robot than to be responsible, since a robot simply responds as its program tells it to do. Pearls, Hefferline, and Goodman offer an interesting suggestion. Notice some of your habits: the way you dress, the way you brush your teeth, the way you open or close a door. If some alternative seems just as good, try to change. Do you take pleasure in learning the new way, or do you encounter strong resistances? What happens if you watch someone perform a task similar to one of your own? Do you get annoyed, irritated, indignant at small variations from your own procedure? Change. Change plays an important role in Christian and Jewish scriptures through the concept of repentance. There is a commonly held view in some religious circles that if I've been acting in ways that bring others pain or harm, all I need to do is recognize the right path and change my views and attitude. The Latin root of the word repentance means to change one's behavior. Saying I'm sorry won't do it. Acting differently will. Even with those aspects of ourselves that are difficult to change, we can learn how to use who we are in more nourishing and creative ways. Doing that is the content of the rest of this chapter and the two that follow. Change and power. Each of us wants to feel our own power, and we resent attempts by others to control us. Similarly, efforts to get others to do what we want them to do can turn into power struggles. Dolores observes, "Dad had an obsession about me not being around boys, which drove me to be more interested in boys." A common parental pattern, states Missaldine in 1963, involves constantly directing with a steady stream of commands and reminders. This over-coercive pattern, as Missaldine calls it, reflects the parent's anxiety about the child and about their adequacy as parents. It can lead to docile obedience without questioning or resistance, to compulsive procrastination and chronic fatigue, or to active resistance with a chip on the shoulder toward anyone in authority. In dealing with my own behavior, power is an issue only when part of me resists what another part wants to do. What I need is clear internal communication about what each side wants and about possible choices. In affecting someone else's actions, the supreme art is to do it in a way that allows the person to be and feel empowered and respected rather than manipulated. Calibration and Homeostasis. Our environment can help or hinder our attempts to alter our behaviors. I may want to change, but face peer or family pressure to keep things just as they are. The people I live with and the institutions that affect me may be suspicious of change, encouraging me to continue to act in ways that they're accustomed to. I can't always predict how you'll respond to my attempts to change. I can easily frighten myself about what you might do and spend a lot of time trying to guess where you'll accept my risk-taking and where you'll reject it, instead of trying new ways that feel good to me and then dealing with what you do in response. In a sense, every person in every social group functions like a thermostat. When the room gets too cold, the thermostat turns on the heater to warm it up. When it gets too hot, the thermostat turns the heater off. Between these two settings, there is a band of acceptable temperature. This band and its top and bottom settings are the calibration of the thermostat. When I leave the room and you walk in, it may feel chilly to you, so you change the setting on the thermostat to make the room a little warmer. You recalibrate it. Similarly, say communication theorists Watzlawick, Bevan, and Jackson in 1967, each of us has a defined range of allowable behavior for ourselves, and every family or other social group has a range of allowable behavior for its members. The range of acceptable behavior is relatively broad for some people and families and relatively narrow for others. But whenever a person steps outside it, that person or his or her social group sends messages to move the person back into the acceptable range. This practice provides a measure of stability. In one couple, for instance, the husband, Don, needs reassurance that he's a good person and provider, and his wife, Cecilia, wants to be dependent, so they play daddy and little girl to each other. When he starts expecting her to do too much, she pouts. When she starts acting too independently, he frets. Then the other person moves back toward what's acceptable within their system. They maintain a homeostasis, a rough balance maintained by feedback from each other. Every now and then, a person or group has to recalibrate to fit changed circumstances. Don may say, "Cecilia, I don't need you to be just my little girl anymore. I'd like more of your adult woman, and I want us to contribute more equally." In relationships where people's needs are openly discussed and resolved, such recalibration is an invigorating event. In a family, such a process is essential if the members are to develop their own independent identities. But sometimes the adjustment switch on our interpersonal thermostat sticks, and it takes a crisis to break it loose enough for readjustment to occur. A mate having an affair, a son getting escorted home in a police car, or employees threatening to quit or strike. These are the kinds of situations that often bring a person or family in for counseling or provoke a company to hire an outside consultant. The outsider's role is to help recalibrate the range of appropriate behaviors with all participants. Girard, in 1975, went so far as to suggest that we can have several different relationships with the same person by letting go of dead patterns and giving ourselves and each other room to be alive in new ways. Divorce, Girard writes, often means that one partner or both feel a need to live in a different way than before. As an alternative to divorce, he is suggesting a way for people to radically redefine their way of living with each other while maintaining their relationship. I suspect that such redefinition occurs most often at points of major developmental change, such as when a child is born or leaves. Limits. Once I'm aware of how I'm limiting myself, I have the option of moving beyond those boundaries. At the same time, I want to stay attuned to the ultimate limits of your nature and mine, and to those of the situation, so that I don't try to push beyond what's reasonable or possible. Moving past my limits may mean taking a risk. Taking a risk does not mean acting stupidly. If I'm on the 14th floor, I won't test the limits of gravity by walking out the window. That's not a risk, it's stupid. In that situation, I know what the limits are. When I don't know what they are, I can look for ways to test them that won't harm me or other people. One important limit is the fear that you won't like what I do, or won't like me, so I bend over backward not to offend you. I do things I don't want to do in order to please or impress you. I can extend my limits by moving closer to the edge of my fears and discomforts instead of staying far back in the safe zone. At the same time, I want to live comfortably with those limits that feel right to me. Problems emerge when I forget that I set these limits and then think that the options I see are the only ones available. Discipline is a valuable kind of limit. Letting my energy go in all directions is a way I can avoid going far in any direction. When chaotic families come in for counseling, the task is to help them develop discipline and limits that allow them to focus energies and get something done. Change and awareness. Change may involve learning new habits to take the place of old ones. First, I try out my new way, then I practice it until it becomes familiar. Change also involves developing more awareness of what's happening in me and around me. I start to act less automatically and more in tune with the unique aspects of what's going on. For example, when people get angry with me, it's not necessarily because of me, but because of what's happening in them. Not long ago, I was on campus late at night and I needed a key that was kept in the boiler plant. The boiler plant supervisor's first response to my asking for a key was hostile. My first impulse was to reply with anger. Then I saw the fatigue in his face and commented that he looked tired. His whole manner changed. He relaxed. After a few words about his troubles in the shop, he was glad to be easier on both of us. Self-monitoring. Years ago, when I began helping people use positive reinforcement and extinction to change their behavior, I noticed an interesting phenomenon. The first step in such change programs is to take a baseline, to record the present frequency of the behavior we want to change. About a third of the people who were taking such baselines came in after several weeks and reported in amazement, "I've stopped doing what I wanted to change. We don't need a change program." I learned about the power of systematically focused awareness in changing behavior, a procedure later labeled as self-monitoring in the psychological literature. I've carried out numerous self-monitoring experiences on myself. I used to have a habit, for example, that I called persuasive talking. I would try to persuade my listener to agree with me. I talked at instead of with him or her. I wanted to stop talking that way. I tried paying attention to it and asked people to tell me when they noticed me doing it, but with no success. Then I got a wrist counter. I started counting instances of persuasive talking and noted them on a graph. In 5 weeks, I was down from many instances a day to just a few. The wrist counter can be useful to reduce the frequency of almost any behavior that isn't maintained by strong reinforcers, as well as to take a baseline. Define as clearly as you can what you want to stop doing. Click your counter once each time you do it. Keep a graph and every day draw a line equal in length to the number of times you clicked the counter. Self-monitoring works like this. When I start counting some way I act, I experience intentionally as fully as I can how I feel acting that way, even if it's unpleasant. However, I may not know until later that I've acted that way. But before too long, that realization comes shortly afterward instead of a day or even a week later. My attention is more focused on and accepting of that way of acting, so I don't work so hard to stop myself from recognizing it. Eventually, I'm aware of the act as I'm performing it. Then I can interrupt the old routine right in the middle. Ultimately, I anticipate its onset and can stop myself even before I start to do it. The basic principles are: define the behavior clearly, count every instance of it you notice, and keep a daily graph. Self-monitoring is most effective when you feel better acting in the new way. Even if I know that in the long run I would prefer acting differently, I'll probably keep acting in the old way if it brings me greater immediate satisfaction than acting in the new way would. This is the principle of immediate reinforcement. An immediate result affects a person's behavior more than a delayed result. A small immediate reward or punishment can affect the way a person acts more than a large one later on. There's also the fear of losing even those old satisfactions that no longer fit who I'm becoming. Psychologist Virginia Horowitz has noted people's resistance to change. They are saying, in effect, "I'm afraid to change. If I do change, I may not get what I used to think I wanted." Another approach is to consciously do what I want to stop doing. Yeats, in 1958, had people with nervous tics deliberately practice the tic in front of a mirror. This was very effective in reducing or getting rid of tics. Imitation. Zen master Dogen once instructed, according to an old master, if you develop a close relationship with a good man, it is like walking in the fog or dew. Although you do not actively wet your garment, it gradually becomes damp. Take a look at the people you associate with. In time, you're going to become more like them. If that doesn't please you, find new associates. who you spend your time with is a big part of who you are. In his statement, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," Jesus was saying in part that imitation is a basic principle of learning. My acts say more than my words about who I am and what I want. When parents tell their children, "Do what I say and not what I do," they're fighting one of the main ways people learn. When my words and actions give you different messages, the odds are good that you'll take me at my actions. A father once said to me, "I just don't know what to do about my son. He tortures the cat, beats up his playmates, and nothing I do seems to help. Time and again I whip the living daylights out of him, but he does no good at all." Bandura and Walters in 1959 found that aggressive boys were punished more by their fathers than were non-aggressive boys, and many studies have shown that after children watch someone in a movie act aggressively, they act more aggressively in their own play. Lids in 1963 declared, "The child unconsciously imitates what the parents are rather than what they pretend to be." And that's true whether we like it or not. Edith, recently divorced, points to how a lack of needed modeling can cause difficulty. "When I was a child, all important decisions and disagreements occurred behind closed doors, and we children were excluded. If I'd seen my parents work out disagreements, I'd have a better idea of how to deal with conflict and negative emotions in my own marriage." As adults, we tend to reflect the emotional tone we pick up from others. If you're warm and caring toward me, I'm more likely to feel that way toward you. And the same with hostility. An apparent exception is ways of acting that call out complementary roles. If you come on like a parent, for instance, I may respond like a child. Yet even with complementary roles, the emotional tone of both parents tends to be similar. As we've seen in chapters 10 and 12, modeling has been widely used to overcome fears and develop assertiveness, but it's useful in making other kinds of changes too. Bandura has pointed out that effective modeling demands 4 elements. The learner must pay attention to the modeled behavior, remember what was learned from the observation, have the capacity to reproduce the desired behavior, and feel motivated to reproduce it. At 5'6", I will not play center for the Celtics no matter how much I watch Wilt Chamberlain. I'm more likely to pay attention to a model's actions and to imitate them if I like or respect that person, and less likely to do so if I dislike him or her. I'm also more apt to imitate coping models, who model a task successfully but with some rough edges, than mastery models, who carry out polished performances. For instance, students who get B's and C's often make better tutors for failing students than A students do. The A student is too different, too hard to imitate. B and C students have easier time being in touch with the failing student and behave in a way the failing student can more readily match. So what do many schools do? They only let A students tutor. Step by step, increasingly difficult behavior can be modeled and imitated. Such a systematic modeling sequence is called graduated modeling. In much of our observational learning, observation is followed by trying out the new behavior. My preschool daughter tries on my swim fins and mask, picks up the broom to sweep after I've put it down, and if I look the other way, drinks my beer. Especially in young children, but to a degree in all of us, much of our imitation needs no outside reward to occur. The very act of doing something that we've never done before may be intrinsically rewarding enough. Nonetheless, observational learning usually is most effective when the new behavior is followed by a reward. Little Roxanne hears big sister ask for apple juice and imitates her. Roxanne tastes the juice, and its good taste is an additional reward. Roxanne becomes more likely to ask for juice in the future. A person who gets rewarded for doing as someone else has done is more likely to act that way again. In addition, our observations of the rewards and punishment that others get as a result of what they do affects the likelihood that we'll behave that way. This is called vicarious reinforcement. Role-playing. One approach to redirecting behavior involves role-playing. In this process, I try some modification of how I behave without having to make a lifetime commitment to it. In a low-risk setting, I choose a role that's mildly different from my usual one and then act it out. Within rather wide limits, you can be anyone you can imagine being, doing anything you can imagine doing. The great Russian director Stanislavski used this principle to teach acting. His actors learned to feel from the inside what it was like to be the characters they were portraying. When I consciously act out a role in my everyday life, my performance can be entirely to please myself, or it can be in some kind of relationship with you. I can become involved in my performance to such an extent that I lose touch with you, or I can stay in contact with you. I can invite you into my drama, and if you're willing to join me there, we can make contact inside it, or I can step into your drama and contact you there. Trying out roles explicitly can sensitize us to habitual and often unconscious role-playing we do every day. During my first year of teaching, I discovered that I was doing my job in ways that dulled me and kept me from growing. Much of the time, I didn't enjoy my work. Then I discovered that when I wasn't having a good time, my students weren't either. I had to play my role differently to stay alive in the classroom. Now I lecture less. I am as much a guide as a teacher. I feel more alive, my students feel more alive, and we all seem to learn more. Curiosity, competence, and the sense of effectiveness. The ability to deal effectively with our environment affects our self-esteem, confidence, persistence, and involvement. Data about what increases our effectiveness comes from studies of curiosity and competence, of the sense of effectiveness, and of learned helplessness. Curiosity. Taboos learned early from an adult's "don't do this, don't do that," even when we were doing nothing harmful, may have stifled our curiosity. As children, we learn to fear that many of our actions might be wrong or hazardous. Many children who have reading problems have grown up with such taboos. Their parents endlessly warn them, "Don't look here, don't look there, don't open the drawers, don't open the closets, don't be curious." The children learn how not to look and then generalize, applying this habit of not looking to the reading process. If I'm told, or tell myself, "Don't say anything about," or even "don't look at," I hold back energy I would use for talking or looking. But if that energy is already aroused, it has to go somewhere. So perhaps my fingers start to fidget. Now someone says, "Stop fidgeting, don't jiggle." More holding back. I'm uncomfortable. Instead of expressing my discomfort of wanting to move but stopping myself, I make myself less and less aware, deadening my sense of my own possibilities. As Harry Harlow's studies show, even monkeys have an innate drive to explore and discover. His monkeys learned to perform a complex task just for the reward of being allowed to look out the window of a box in which they were confined. Competence. Exploration includes experimentation. We're curious not only about what's out there, but about what we can do with it. When a small boy grabs the spoon from his parent and tries to feed himself, the primary goal is not, as we can see by the debris beneath his chair, to eat more efficiently. The point is to do it himself. The encouragement from succeeding gradually leads to increasing competence in the tasks. But sometimes we can and do interrupt that process. Have you ever watched a parent or older sibling get angry with a child who's trying to do something? If I say to my daughter, "How many times do I have to tell you? You're all thumbs," it shakes her confidence in her own ability. It interferes with her development of a sense of competence in dealing with her world. Without realizing it, I may have a psychological commitment to her being all thumbs. If she becomes competent, I can't feel so superior anymore. The same is often true of a supervisor and his or her workers. If the workers get really good at their jobs, the supervisor's status might have less impact. Were I your mate, I could keep you dependent on me by keeping you from learning skills you need for you to make it on your own. Were I your parent, I could keep you dependent on me to nurture you so that you don't nurture yourself and continue to need me. "Anything worth doing is worth doing badly," someone once said. Whatever her present level of mastery, Instead of criticizing my daughter, I can give her some appreciation for what she's done so far. Good, you've done well with that one. Now, here's a little thing you can do to improve your next one. My comment can add to the reinforcement that being successful provides and can substitute for the natural feedback of success when it takes a while to change. When I set short-term goals and give a lot of moment-to-moment support, reassurance, and appreciation, she learns that she can do things. She learns to appreciate herself. She starts talking to herself the way I've talked to her. Bandura found that success at short-term sub-goals can build intrinsic interest in a task where little or none existed before. Among children learning mathematics, those who had set attainable sub-goals moved rapidly into self-directed learning. They mastered mathematical skills and developed interest and persistence in activities that previously didn't interest them. The sense of effectiveness. My feelings of competence may be higher or lower than my real abilities. An accurate appraisal of my competence can keep me out of trouble. Nonetheless, we tend to develop a general attitude about our ability or inability to do things that sometimes distorts our appraisals of our specific competencies. Social learning theorists call this self-efficacy. It's a little easier on the tongue to speak out of our sense of effectiveness. Bandura finds that even in the face of obstacles, the stronger a person's sense of effectiveness, the more vigorous and persistent his or her efforts will be. Our sense of effectiveness increases, Bandura concludes, when new experiences contradict our old beliefs about our fears and inadequacies and lead us to new skills that help us manage difficult or threatening activities. Learned helplessness. The other side of the sense of effectiveness, which could be called a sense of ineffectiveness, is referred to as learned helplessness, which we encountered in Chapter 12 in relation to depression. It is the feeling and subjective observation that I cannot initiate or maintain necessary changes in my life or myself. Learned helplessness develops, according to Martin Seligman and his colleagues, when events are not connected to our actions, so that events that affect us seem more uncontrollable, even when they're not. For instance, someone who's broke and unemployed may feel helpless and anxious in the face of very real demands from bill collectors and the landlord. If he also believes looking for a job would be futile, he's less likely to look or seek out ways to be more employable. Feeling helpless further lowers his self-esteem, which in turn leads to less effective thinking and decreased motivation. One way to move forward feeling and being effective in change rather than helpless is, as we've seen, to be successful in smaller changes. Another is to explore new ways to talk to ourselves about our success and failure experiences. People with a learned sense of helplessness, points out Lampson, often make external attributions for success. It was just luck, and internal attributions for failure. I guess I'm just incompetent. People with a sense of effectiveness are more likely to make external attributions for failure, the conditions weren't right, and internal ones for success. I have the ability to do it. But a sense of effectiveness is not identical to actual effectiveness. I suspect that we are actually most effective when we accurately assess what we contribute to both our failures and our successes. End of Chapter 21.